Chapter 224 Call into the Void. Summary. The message is sent. Now, all they can do is wait and hope their allies get there in time. It's not actually cold in the ship. Mina knows that. But there's something about the darkness, so thick around them and the ship, that seems to submerge her in a chill no matter how close to Katsuki she presses herself. His quirk meant that he ran warmer than most people, making him, much to his chagrin, the ideal cuddle buddy. Yet this time, he doesn't seem to be enough. Without asking, it was hard to tell if the others were feeling the chill. Though, the fact that they all settled in the nest after Izuku came up with the idea of keeping the floating blanket mass contained with a makeshift cable spiderweb tied over the sitting area, seemed to point towards yes. Though it may have also been the fact that there wasn't anything else to do. The distress call to the guild had been sent out hours ago, and with the limited amount of power they had, almost all of their normal ways to pass the time were out of the picture. If they hadn't been taken out by the super flare that was, Mina didn't even want to try to turn on her data tablet after the state Ochakos had been in. It just made her sad, seeing it fizzle a dying little screech. With there really not being any other options for what to do, she'd been doing her best to sleep through the long stretch of nothing. Key word of that being trying. It wasn't too hard to fall into a doze, deep enough so her aching muscles and stinging cuts muffled into no more than a whisper, light enough she could hear every sound that hummed through the ship. But real resting sleep was escaping her. It was hard to say exactly what it was that was blocking her. It could have been the part of her mind that was insisting she couldn't sleep because sleep meant leaving herself vulnerable, and if she was vulnerable, they would catch her. Or maybe it was the anxious knot in her chest that grew with every hour that passed without a sign of rescue. There were plenty of reasons to pick from. She shouldn't be surprised. But she was. This feeling of some part of her brain just not letting her sleep, washing a wave of awareness over her whenever she got close, wasn't something her brain did. Sometimes she was kept awake by a fear of the nightmares that could follow, or she was just too emotional and needed to cry it out first. But when she finally laid down to sleep, she was always able to slip away. Until now. She didn't like it. She also didn't want to think about the reason for the change. Not yet. She would slip away again if she even thought about the fact there was something she wasn't thinking about for too long. But it was so hard when there was nothing to do and she couldn't sleep. Mei, Izuku, and Denki were all asleep, and Ochako was vigilantly keeping an eye out on the front of the ship for any sign of help. Katsuki had his eyes closed, but with how close she was to him, she could feel his heart beating too fast for him to be asleep. She could talk to him about something, but the thought of breaking the silence that they'd been sitting in for hours made her skin prickle. The ship was never this quiet. The unnatural silence made the whole thing feel fake and lifeless. She really wished she was back on Earth now. She would ask the 1A girls if they wanted to have a girls' night, and they'd gather in someone's room to watch movies and paint each other's nails and summon a demon. It would be chaotic, noisy, crowded, and just what she needed. She let herself drift in the image as the hours crawled by. Katsuki shifted her onto Izuku at one point and left for the kitchen, coming back not too much later with an armful of snacks. Everything tasted sort of bland, but she ate anyway, eager to slip back into her dozing daydream. 31 hours. By the time she got their first glimpses of light not stolen from far-off stars, it had been 31 hours since Ochako sent out the message. 31 hours of growing more and more worried that she hadn't been clear enough about how desperately they needed help. 31 hours of second-guessing the trust they had placed in the guild. But they were finally here. Or at least, someone was. "Mei!" Ochako hurriedly said, pulling herself along the cable mesh to reach the girl on the other side of the nest. "Get up! Someone's here! I need the communication systems back online." In the blink of an eye, the tech gremlin was out of the nest and soaring for a tangle of wire, half hanging out of the wall. It was a little startling to see Mei wake up without grumbling and blinking blearily like a zombie, but Ochako was grateful, as she pushed herself through the air to the nav console with just as much urgency. Artificial lights drew closer and closer. In the minute or so it took for Mei to shift power to communications, Ochako tried to let herself believe the massive ship coming into view was here to help and nothing else. It was one of the biggest ships she'd seen, a massive oval of blue-gray metal interspersed with windows that glowed a soft yellow. The massive thrusters along either side of the ship's body stretched into the back, with nuclear yellow light seeping from their openings. Ochako's pretty sure that the ship encompassing the whole view of the windshield could fit more than 200 of their own inside it. As soon as her control panel came to life, Ochako could see a message pop up on one of the screens. She wasted no time accepting the hail request, and the ship's speakers crackled wearily to life. "This is the vessel Solavia, a starship of the planet Zeroi. Come in, Kiro. Kiro, do you read me?" A melodic voice asked. Ochako's hands hovered over the button to enable the microphone on the ship, glancing back at the others who had all gathered around her. They were all watching with cautious anticipation. She pressed the button. "This is the Kiro. We hear you loud and clear, Solavia. Are you with the guild?" Ochako said, as poised as she could. She hoped the way her voice faltered from being used so abruptly after more than a day of disuse didn't translate across the comms. The comms fizzled as the melodic voice replied. "Affirmative. The guild contacted this vessel to relay a request of aid for the downed ship of one of its members approximately 2.5 cycles ago. Does your ship consent to being brought aboard the Solavia?" With a deep breath to steady herself, Ochako replied. "Yes. The crew of the Kiro consents to our vessel being brought aboard the Solavia." "Hold fast. The Solavia will get into position before sending out individuals to guide your vessel into a docking bay." And with that, the comm channel closed with a chime, leaving Ochako and the others to watch as the massive ship drifted alongside before stopping in sight of a large side door. The thick panel raised slowly, opening the way for them to view the hangar, empty but for a few figures floating with cables thicker than their torso. When the door had finished opening, the figures moved forward as one end of their cables trailing behind them. It was hard to see what they were doing as they made their way around the Kiro. But it wasn't hard to guess. The blooping sound of metal siding being suctioned against something came from either side of the ship a couple of times, and within a few minutes, the figures returned to the open hangar empty-handed. Ochako focused on one that made their way back to the wall, where the limp cables all led back to. There must have been some sort of panel there. As soon as they arrived, the cables drew taut, and the Kiro began to move. The others held on to the back of her chair and the side of the panel to stay in place as the ship was maneuvered into the metal ground. It wasn't hard to tell when the door of the bay closed, despite the fact they were facing away from it. The sound of floating panels and knickknacks crashing to the floor, alongside the feeling of gravity settling over her again, made it pretty evident that they were out of space's void. Ochako felt a relieved breath wind its way out of her chest. Safe. They were finally safe from suffocating to death out in space. If they were safe from the ones who had rescued them, that was another story Ochako wasn't looking forward to figuring out.